Hello out there. My name is Laulu Akonde and you are on to Inside Sources. Today, we want to reiterate our condolences to all the families of the victims that were affected in the stampedes in Ibadan, Okija, and here in Maitama, Abuja. We pray that such kind of incidents will be averted in our future. And of course, we thank God for bringing us to the end of the year, and we pray that all of us will see the backside of this year. Inside Sources will be right back. Welcome back to Inside Sources. Today, I will be skipping the My Take segment because I want to focus on notable issues in the country in two very important segments. The first segment is going to reveal some deeper insights into the tax reform bill from a young Nigerian legal practitioner. And of course, this was one of the issues that Mr. President spoke about at his first media chat on Monday. To join me in that first segment today, I'd like to welcome back to Inside Sources, Mr. Ibrahim Wali. Mr. Wali, welcome back to Inside Sources.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to join you.
Thank you.
Yes,
thank you so much. Yes. So to start with, what did you think about the President's media chat on Monday?
Well, I'm going to try to be as frank as possible. First of all, I felt like it was too patronizing. I don't think that there was enough specifics, and I don't think that it really flowed from a place of detailed reporting. I feel like at this point in time, what Nigerians need is an actual report of, the last 18 months of what happened, of ministry by ministry, departments by departments, in line with the budgets, to also look at how these people have actually performed. I think that it was supposed to really be an exercise that really looked at all the issues from rule of law, from the inflation rates and why the inflation rates are skyrocketed. Maybe talk about how you actually intend to take it down to 15% that was proposed in the budget. So I don't think there was enough specifics, really. When he talked about corruption, and he talked about corruption using a passive argument. He said that removing the fuel subsidy was fighting corruption. But I don't think that this makes any sense. You fight corruption actively. The subsidy regime, one of the argument was that it was corrupt. Removing it entirely was only one out of the possible options. You could have actually tried to see if you could, rid it of the corruption and see if you can maximize it and use it for the benefit of Nigerians. But outright removing it can't be anti-corruption. And when they removed it, they didn't make these arguments anyway. There's been no institutional improvement in the way the Nigerian police operates or any of the institutions really. The EFCC, I as a legal practitioner, obviously, that I interact with these institutions a lot. There's not been any improvement in terms of rule of law, or, in fact, I think the opposite is the case, and we've been seeing a series of arrests, a lot under the Cyber Crimes Act, a lot under the defamation laws. We saw what happened with the protests. A lot of people actually got killed, especially in the north. Nothing really was said about it. Even the stampede issue was only glossed over. But I think hunger was the primary cause, not disorder or anything of that nature. So I really don't think that the president spoke to the common Nigerian. First of all, it is their duty, and they promised, and they actually have a report out with KPIs to tell us what ministers, their ministries and their performance. It is their duty. I remember one of the essays, I think, on policy. She came out. She said that they were going to do. I think they were going to do it 3 times or 4 times in a year, and all of them.
Madam Hadiza.
Yes, Madam Hadiza. But so it is their duty, first of all, to actually give us these reports. But asking journalists, seasoned journalists who ought to have, I think, covered a lot of what has happened in Nigeria to, tell them the ministers that are underperforming, and they couldn't. I think that it's just that culture of. It was monarchical in a sense. It didn't look like it was a democracy. In a democracy, you should be able to actually confront the president. And obviously, the way that they've run the government is generally monarchical, because these reports aren't supposed to be really something you schedule over time. You have to propagate. It ought to really be often. I can't remember when last I really got a detailed report from my president or something that's direct to me, that's really not choreographed and arranged in that way. So I think that it didn't help. I don't think that was a communication for the average Nigerian, frankly. We can go, into the arguments themselves, but I don't think that on the surface it is not.
I just wanted to, to tease off the conversation with that. I wanted us to focus on the tax reform bills, and during that interview also, the president came out very strong on that issue and said that there is no going back.
Yes.
So my first question to you is that what do you consider to be the rather more germane issues in that tax reform bills from your own
analysis of
it?
So first of all, again, with the lack of specifics, the president spoke really aggressively about the tax reforms, but there wasn't specifics. And these are 4 bills, by the way. I expect the president to really dig into the bills and actually connect it to how it helps, different classes of Nigerians. But for me personally, I think that the most, absurd introduction to these, to the tax system in Nigeria is the increase in the VAT regime itself, the rate itself. I know that the governors are arguing about the derivation and the collection and all of that. That might be an issue, but my own primary issue is the rate itself. The argument is that the rate should actually reflect the global average. But when you look at the global average when it comes to the minimum wage, living standards, when it comes to GDP per capita, you see that we're not quite close. So if we're not close, I don't see how we will suddenly use that metric for the VAT mechanism. I think that, going by that analysis, it should actually be reduced to maybe 5% or 3.5% because, it's probably, closer to our reality in terms of our GDP per capita, in terms of the earning capacity of Nigeria. So I don't think any bill, any tax rate that is increased now helps Nigerians. And you have to understand that in VAT particularly, they argue is a consumption tax. So it means it is actually the citizens who actually pay it at the end of the day, the final consumer. Right. The companies who actually help the revenue service to collect and remit, that is their duty. Yeah. It is actually you and I who pay. And the argument is that the VAT-intensive sectors are non-essential sectors. So they have exempted essential sectors like food and all, agriculture. That's true, yeah. But these exemptions have existed since, by the way, and there was a modification order in 2020 that enlarged it. The recent argument is that, some of the exempted items have been moved to a flat rate instead. I'll come back to the flat rate argument. But even the argument that these products are non-essential, if you look at the top 10 VAT-intensive industries, you see telecommunications, general ICT, right. You would see the manufacturing sector, you see the financial sector, all these banks, right. So I don't understand how you want to move an economy into the future. When you look at, one of the aspects of their policies, modern economy, and you're saying that telecommunications is non-essential. So people should pay VAT on it. And if you tell Nigerians to pay VAT on MTN, Airtel, Etisalat, Glo, to pay on First Bank, Union Bank transactions with the electronic money transfer levy and all those things, taking it off Agbalumo and lettuce in the street doesn't help anybody. It's just finesse. Only big companies can actually, utilize the impute VAT mechanism. What it really means is that, okay, if you're in these sectors, these exempted sectors or these flat rate sectors, for all the money that you spend in buying your own products, your own inputs, to do your output with, some of the products you actually have to pay VAT on it. So you're expected to calculate that VAT, and then, maybe when you're paying your tax or maybe with the Nigerian Revenue Service, you send it to them and you get a deduction. And that is supposed to prevent you from passing it on to the consumers. First of all, there's no mechanism that prevents it. So it is arbitrary. It's at the discretion of this company. Secondly, you have to understand that VAT, and if you look at the, industries that actually generates VAT, you see that it requires serious formalization. You have to actually have, proper invoicing system so that you make your returns. So it is actually only those, companies under the flat rate who have these systems who can benefit. And you can't even measure whether they didn't even pass it on all the same. So the small companies who are exempted in the first place, don't even have these mechanisms. If you look at the report, you see that about 93, 94, 95% of Nigerian companies are small companies. They are informal companies. So they don't even have invoicing systems such that they can, calculate their impute VAT. They will use the local system. I paid this amount and I'm going to charge this amount because it covers this and I think this is my profit. Nothing about the input VAT mechanism. So it is the same companies, big companies, who can benefit from them. I don't see how there's nothing in the provision in the laws that actually helps the common man and small companies.
But what about the fact that the pay taxes and everything is already actually almost removed for people who are considered to be vulnerable and low income?
Yeah, it's just removing what was in there.
Even small complaints too. If you don't make more than if you make less than 10 million, I think you don't have to pay it.
No, it says that if you have a turnover of 50 million naira minimum, and then you have at least 250 million naira in asset,
right.
In fixed asset,
right.
Then you are a small company. Mm-hmm. That is in the proposal. But in the current law, if you are turning over 25 million naira and below, you're already exempted as it is.
In the current law, yeah.
Yes, so you have to understand that, yes, for the majority of them, it is an exemption that already exists.
But it's now enlarged.
Yes, to 50 million naira.
Yeah.
Here comes the problem. In the current system, 50 million naira to 100 million naira are usually medium companies, right? Or rather 25 million naira to 100 million naira medium companies, right? These medium companies pay, in turnover. These medium companies pay a 20% rate of CIT today. Mm-hmm. Today, as it is, they pay a 20% rate. So if you bring the minimum down, you increase it to 50, it means companies 50 and below will not pay anything. Right. But companies 50 and above, right. Even companies that used to pay 20% between 50 and 100 right. would have to pay 27% and then 24% and then a final 20%. Right. So their tax actually increases and then comes back to what it is today.
Just to deepen your analysis, don't you agree that, or basically this is an empirical fact, that Nigeria is among the lowest tax to GDP countries in the world?
It makes sense.
So if you try to, if we are not getting enough internal revenue that we ought to get, don't you think that we have to structure quite a few things, to take care of that?
I absolutely agree.
So that those who can pay.
I absolutely agree that we need a new tax system, without a doubt. And those who can pay, who should pay, should pay. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about it. But all the arguments that I'm making so far is that in the current framework, those who can actually pay are told to pay lesser. That is the reduction of company income tax from 30% down to 27%, and then, I think down to 20%. Only big companies actually pay CIT. If you look at the exemptions, the small companies and all these things. And if you look at the companies that actually pay more CIT, they are the, same companies that actually make more profit in Nigeria as it is today. There's only a few industries that actually post profit. And these same industries are the ones who, pay the higher CIT. So they're saying reduce their CIT for them so that we can attract similar companies. Yeah. Right? So that's that on one side. So that's a reduction on that side. And then you say VAT. And that is why VAT is a very burning issue for me, that the consumers pay, that I have to pay all my recharge cards, I have to pay all my bank transfers, I have to pay, it goes up. So it doesn't align with, what they claim.
All right. Now, but besides VAT, do you have any other, critical views about the four tax bills?
Oh, definitely, especially from a legal standpoint. There's a section in the Nigerian Revenue Service Bill that says that the laws themselves, or rather the Nigerian tax bill itself, that says that the provisions of the act itself supersedes the provisions of all tax legislations in Nigeria, whether it is from the state government or by the local government. So it's actually clearly states that it is whether all tax laws in all the tiers of the government. That is the word, in the tiers of the government. So obviously it seeks to infringe on the constitutional powers of states and local governments, and I think that this is just going to lead to protracted litigation. Already there's a portion of the law that they have already struck out. That is the portion on gaming and gambling and stuff like that. Yeah. The Supreme Court held that this is under the domain of state governments, and it is part of these proposed bills. So already parts of them are being chunked out. So if they proceed to court, this is how I feel like these things they are going to lead to these things, and that's just one issue. I really also have an issue with the powers that the Nigerian Revenue Service are going to get, especially with regards to, the arbitral usage of all institutions, including law enforcement institutions, that is the police, the EFCC, and everybody to go after, tax defaulters. Now, I understand the reasoning behind it, but this is Nigeria. There ought to be a check of some sort.
But they normally have tax tribunals.
Yes, tax tribunals are different issues. Now, the law says that, if they intend to, if they want to, either to go into your house or your documents because it allows them, or whatever it is, they can use the services or, of these institutions. And we know how these institutions operate.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ibrahim Wali, for those very deep insights. At least we both agree that, we have to find a way to collect more taxes because our country is one of the lowest.
From those who can pay.
Yeah, for those who can pay. And then the tax ID thing, it ought not to be a concern, but I understand.
Yeah, that's a vulnerable class of Nigerians that shouldn't need these things because
no, well, you don't know.
Compliance. You don't just this are and there are penalties to failure to do these things.
No, but the thing is that if you don't have income, even if you have a tax ID, if you don't have significant income, you're not supposed. It's not going to matter.
That's the thing. Even for all those flat rate, exempt, and this, you are actually expected to comply, to send in a
report
that says that you are exempt zero. That it in itself is cumbersome, and Ibrahim, if you fail to do it, they can come through your tax ID, invite the police.
Ibrahim, that is the global standard.
This is Nigeria.
Yeah,
we have to contextualize our laws.
No, but it's important if we don't. If we don't take some of this, and I take your insights quite very useful. But there are things that we just got to do.
Yeah, but we have
and then we should
there are classes of people that should.
No. What I think we should do, in my view, is that you just make sure that this thing we will all be alert when it's being implemented. We can't say that people shouldn't. We need to have everybody's data. All these things are.
We have their NIN, we have their voters card. They have literally.
Well, you must have their tax ID. Look. If you live in the US, so I live in the US, and when I was here, let me just get it. So I left the US in 2015 to come and take a job in Nigeria for 8 years. I still had to be reporting because I have assets there. I still have to be reporting, even though I was not earning money. So all of these things, they are good for
tax updates from my time in the UK. But now the thing is, I would agree to maybe a proposition that says that immediately you get your first employment, you're eligible. You must get a tax ID and failure to do it, blah, blah, blah. But to say that every single Nigerian at all times, I don't think that it is contextualized.
Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's a very good place to conclude that discussion. Thank you for coming
to Inside Sources,
and thank you for your contribution and your very brilliant insights.
Thank you, Laul. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. And there you have it. That's our first segment. The second segment will be coming soon. Welcome back to Inside Sources. Today, as we have our conversation around the future of the country, I have a returning guest, the Executive Director of the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, a leading human rights lawyer and activist in Nigeria. I would like to welcome back to Inside Sources, Mr. Clement Nwankwo. My brother, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Lalu.
Yeah, and it's the end of the year, I guess. It's looking like people are getting ready to just chill.
Yeah, I think it's been a hard year for a lot of people, and I guess for a lot of people it might still not be chill because the hardship continues even during this season. But yes, it's good to come to a period of the year when you're able to slow down and take stock and prepare for the incoming year.
Yeah. And there are quite a lot of things on the table of the country, a few things happening. I wanted us to start this conversation today around the tax reform. I know that your center is involved with a lot of the lawmaking processes. Hopefully you tell us the story about how that happened. But in your own view, what do you think is the what do you think is happening? As somebody who works closely with the lawmakers, what do you think is happening on this set of tax reform bills, and how do you think it's going to end?
I think that there's a whole lot that focuses on sharing the federal pause, the pause that comes into the federation account. And for states, particularly, and the different representatives of those states, it's a question of how do we either get the best advantage for our state or retain the status quo that gives us advantage currently. So a lot of people do not want to change the current situation because whether it's on the principle of derivation or on the principle of population or whatever principle it is, the system has skewed up advantages. And so that's what the struggle is about. As to whether you need tax reforms, this country certainly needs tax reforms. And for us as a human rights organization, the bigger concern is about the citizen. How does the tax reform lessen the burden on the common man, on the ordinary Nigerian who wants to make the best out of the situation? How does the tax reform increase investment in the economy? How does it lessen the burden it puts on those who want to invest in the economy? I think that's the big issue for us. Yes, there is the argument going on between certain states, the federal government, about the implications of the tax bill for them. And I think, yes, there should be the opportunity for that conversation to happen publicly. And that's why the talk about a public hearing has become even more important.
Now, do you think, that the National Assembly, and this is my view. Now, there's been a lot of controversy. Governors say that, the president should withdraw the bill, and some senators have even said, at least one senator have said that, yes, withdraw the bill, give it to the governors, let the governors sort it out, and then bring it back to us in 24 hours. Don't you think, because I think, Clement, that the National Assembly actually ought to be the proper venue for such issues like this set of bills to be debated, consulted around, even negotiated, because the National Assembly is supposed to be the people's parliament. What's your view on that?
Well, the Constitution creates powers for the different tiers of government, whether it's the government at the federal level, which is where you have on the 10th schedule of the Constitution what you call the exclusive legislative list, which is where the federal government exercises powers to the exclusion of every other tier of government. You then have the concurrent legislative list, which is where the federal government shares powers with the states. And of course, in that circumstance, always the federal government's powers supersede that of the states. The states, to the extent that it doesn't contradict the federal government's powers, have those powers. Of course, you have the residuary, subsidiary powers you find in the 4th schedule to the Constitution for local governments. And local governments have been ineffective in this country. So I think that, and again, it's a point that I make continuously, no government should operate without a legislative agenda. The sad thing with Nigeria is that you have had governments at both state and federal level unable to articulate a legislative agenda for themselves. And that's why you see the National Assembly tell you that they are putting forward a legislative agenda, which is good, but the real legislative agenda should be driven by the federal government. And I make the point repeatedly that it's not the business of the legislator to continually propose bills. So when people measure the achievements of a legislator by how many bills they have put forward, it's wrong. It's the federal government. You are the
executive arm of government.
You are the executive arm of government. You are running the government. You know how the laws are. You know where the gaps are. You should propose bills to the National Assembly or with the states to the State House of Assembly. We have failed in this. So when you talk of the tax reform bill, I would say it's welcome in broad principle. The nitty-gritty, of course, is when it gets into the National Assembly would have to hold public hearings. So those who are threatening and getting angry that the federal government proposed the bill are not following what the Constitution says. The federal government can propose bills, and that's what it has done. It has put forward an executive bill. As you know, executive bills are taken very seriously. So when it goes there, everyone who has a concern, and we have a concern. I, for instance, have a concern about what is the tax implication for the NGO sector.
Okay.
What is the tax implication for the poor? What is the tax implication for businesses? Because when you look at the tax bill, for instance, and people need to look at this, Nigerian businesses are the most taxed. Multiple taxations. And you saw the report from the Oyedele committee that talked of more than 20-something taxes.
Right.
And the taxes are coming from local governments, from federal governments.
There are toll gates everywhere.
Everywhere. The Constitution specifically prohibits double taxation. In Nigeria, there is more than double taxation. You take money, you move money from your account to a gift to somebody else's account. You are taxed for taking the money out of your account.
By your bank, actually.
Then the person who receives the money is taxed on the same monies. So there's just too much taxation. And then you have taxation by phone companies at different levels. You saw the one that amended the Cybercrime Act that gives powers to the National Security Advisor to be paid a certain percentage of tax.
Hopefully that was held down.
I don't know whether it's not been implemented as we speak.
Oh, wow.
There was, of course, the outcry. There was a public statement that it wasn't going to be implemented immediately, but we need to go back and see whether that is true or not.
Oh, wow.
So all of this taxation is just incredibly, incredibly so much. And so businesses are folding up. Businesses are folding up. And when you look at the tax reform bill, it's also talking about taxing companies on their profits.
Yeah.
As we speak, in that bill is a proposal to tax companies what is called development levy, 4%
of their profit.
Of their profits. Now, these companies are already paying taxation on profits, the company's income tax. So is this a new tax that this reform bill is proposing? Or what is it really that it is saying? And it's saying that you still have other taxes imposed on companies. As we speak, there's education tax on companies, 1%. There is all sorts of taxes on companies. A company does not set up its business
to fund,
to share its profit with you. It has an obligation to pay its tax on the profits. But beyond that, why are you, every time there's an establishment bill in the National Assembly, they immediately tax companies. And so that's what companies are complaining about. And that's why a lot of businesses are shutting down. And that's why a lot of businesses are going offshore or going into other countries to operate.
Anyway, I mean, very important point. But you do also consider that our tax to GDP ratio is one of the lowest in the world. So we do really need to fix our tax system clearly.
It certainly needs to be fixed. And you know, when you talk of taxation as well, if you look at the costs to operate in Nigeria, it's very, very high.
That's true.
And so when a company sets up here, it has to fund its water supply, its own electricity, in addition to arbitrary bills coming from electricity companies who charge people in the most arbitrary manner. Nobody is able to oversight the arbitrariness of some of these utility companies that have been so-called privatized. So when you look at the cost of doing business in the country, it's just so very high. So when people say the cost to GDP ratio is low, you're talking of the formal taxation.
Yeah, exactly. That should be the proper.
But when you look at all of the other things, how can businesses operate in a country where they are responsible for setting up their own infrastructure, public infrastructure? So there's a lot to do. It's not just simply putting forward a tax reform bill. You must also make the environment conducive for people to not spend so much to create a public infrastructure to enable them to operate. Okay.
It's a very important conversation, actually. Now, the other aspect that I wanted to raise is the issue of, no representation without taxation. Are you of the view, or do you agree with the view that part of the reasons why the engagement of the people with the government is not really as robust as it ought to be from the point of view of the people holding those in government accountable is because, well, most of our resources, most of the funds that we get comes from natural resources. So we are basically getting rents. Government is paid rents. It's not that if it's anybody's money, really. Do you think that do you agree with the view that probably even affects the kind of demand for public accountability?
I think that does not justify overtaxing people. If you want to tax people to the point that they get angry and begin to ask questions in a violent manner, then that's a problem. Yes, I agree with you that the levels of accountability are low. Mineral resources are exploited, and so a lot of monies come from that. But for every penny, every kobo that comes in to the national purse from these natural resources, so much more does not come in. So when you look at even the export of crude, I do not know that today we have completely solved the problem of crude oil theft.
Right, no, it's a big problem. Yeah.
That's one. And there are several other minerals. Across the country, the levels of banditry in the country is escalated by the fact that that banditry level is needed to exploit and steal mineral resources from across the country. And the government has not been able to do so. How much money, for instance, or revenues are coming into the Federation account from exploitation of mineral resources? A lot of it, whether it is gold or uranium or bauxite or whatever it is, and there's tons of it in Nigeria, in every part of the country, not just in the areas of tension in the northeast or northwest or north central, but across the country are different minerals. How many people, how many companies, how many businesses are reporting back and paying into the Federation account? And does the government, in fact, have a mechanism to collect the revenues?
I guess this tax reform, it addresses...
No, the tax reform bill is not going to deal with that. You have to have an accountability system, a mechanism. What is the Minister of Solid Minerals doing, for instance? What mechanism has it put in place? People who are mining, do they have the authority to mine in the areas they are mining? Is there anybody expecting them? It's just like we're talking about the export of crude oil. Right. It's easier to monitor, how much goes out. Not that we do that successfully. But with minerals, it's even almost a free-for-all. So how are we dealing with this? How are we dealing with foreigners who enter the country and create areas of operation that security agencies cannot even go to, or that security agencies, as you know, are accused of collaborating with them?
I know that this current minister seems to be, although that conversation has been on to try to regulate that industry and try to sort out the issues. Hopefully, we'll be able to get around to it. But I wanted to ask you, as a matter of an ideological understanding, does taxation give people more voice if they tax? Does it really, is that argument, when they say, there's no representation without taxation, is it applicable in Nigeria? Do you imagine? The term no representation without taxation, no taxation without representation, or vice versa, was part of the struggle for independence issues, not just in America, in Nigeria. If you looked at the efforts of women the 1929 Aba riot,
the 1929 Aba riots, or even in Abeokuta, the riots there as well, had to do with people being taxed without being given a seat on the table. I think in Nigeria today, current day Nigeria, you can say that in the context of no taxation without accountability. And that's what a lot of Nigeria, the tax we pay, how are you accounting for it? That's really what the issue is. And beyond that, there is something that is also going on. And you know, I live in Abuja, the FCT, and I'm sure this happens across several parts of the country, where taxation has been found out to companies and consultancies. So companies that are owned or which have dubious ownership between themselves and public officials are the ones collecting taxes on behalf of government. So the way that these companies operate is such that it doesn't matter to them the fairness of the taxation. So if you come to Abuja, for instance, you could have a fee slapped on you for something by a consultant tax collecting company.
Who is going to get a caught?
Who is going to get a caught? And so their measure of success is how much they can extract. So a lot of times the volume of taxation is exceedingly high, the levies are exceedingly high, whatever they collect, they get their profits. And it's the same with government agencies. I have no understanding, for instance, why agencies of government should be allowed to retain a huge percentage of revenues collected. For instance, you go to customs. Customs is allowed to retain a certain percentage. I don't know whether it's 3% or so.
I think all of that is changing now.
Well, it has to change if this country is to move forward. Because what you see these agencies doing is that they collect these taxes, and you can imagine collecting taxes running into trillions of naira and being asked as an agency to retain even 1% of that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that needs to change with the taxation system that can help to increase collectible revenue for government at all levels.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, let's move on to issue of constitutional amendments. You know, knowing the role that you played, maybe you actually want to tell us, you know, some of the roles that PLAC plays. But the first question I want to frame is that there are those who say now that, look, what you have in the National Assembly is every 4 years, you know, there is a new budget for constitutional amendments every 4 years. Is that really prudent? You know, must we have to tinker with the Constitution every 4 years? Shouldn't we try to have a much more, a broader approach, look at the old Constitution, develop a new Constitution? What's your take? How do you reflect?
I think there are different sides to this, and I agree with people who worry about the constant review of Constitution. It shouldn't be that the Constitution is reviewed every time by a new National Assembly. That for me, it demystifies the Constitution. And that's why it's so very important to have that one moment when you look at the... Don't forget that there are people who do not even accept that this Constitution is legitimate.
Well, I mean, it says we the people, there was no time.
Yes, it says we the people, and we the people didn't sit down to do this. But I don't want to get involved in those conversations.
Yeah.
First of all, for us in PLAC, Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, ours is to contribute to efforts. And we don't, the budget is not, for us, our issue. We don't get paid. I don't personally get paid to support and work with the National Assembly on constitution review or even electoral reforms. We specifically do not derive any material benefit from
it,
participating in it. So for us, the budget of the National Assembly comes to it as it appropriates to itself. But because there's constant demand for constitutional amendment, the National Assembly has to respond to it. And that's why each session of the National Assembly sets up its own process. And from what I know, I do not think that the budget the National Assembly sets even for itself, for constitutional review, is sufficient to address what it is doing. So I am not in that space of talking about excessive budgeting, because I know from what we see that they do not have sufficient money to do that, because we have to even bring in our own resources to support the National Assembly.
Interesting.
But the point I think needs to be made is what you have just said. Let there be that one moment, that time when the whole issue of constitutional review is addressed holistically. Because as we speak, there are several gaps in the Constitution, and there are several issues. Why, for instance, do we have election petition litigation go from the tribunals to the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court, and people are sworn into office while election petitions are going on? Why does Ghana, next door, whom we are learning from now quite shamefully, why does Ghana have an election that everybody is satisfied with? The Electoral Commission there is trusted, but in Nigeria, we don't trust our Electoral Commission. And we now have to litigate and go on and on and on. President Tinubu's election was challenged from the Court of Appeal level to the Supreme Court, and he was already sworn in when all of that litigation was going on. And you know how difficult it is for the courts to remain balanced, dealing with an incumbent in office. So we think it's very important that, you know, these issues are thrashed out in a constitutional amendment. But it's going to be the National Assembly to look at what people are suggesting to it, decide on what bills to propose to itself, and subject this to public hearing and get public inputs and pass what needs to be passed. And don't forget that the issue of constitutional amendment is not just the National Assembly. Yeah. The State House of Assembly have a role as well. Okay. And you need a president. And that's the point I've been making. You need a president who is not self-serving to understand these issues. And that's the point that I make constantly. Why does the president sit back? And he has a well-respected Attorney General, but why do they sit back and wait for all manners of bills to be sent to the National Assembly and go through all of that whole stretch of arguments, then come back to the president if it is passed for his own assent, without the president making any input? I make the point repeatedly. The business of the president, the business of the Attorney General is to propose bills to the National Assembly, not for National Assembly to be proposing a legislative agenda or proposing bills.
So you mean that the constitutional amendment ought to be driven by the executive?
It ought to be driven by the president, just like the president is driving the tax reform issue. You propose your bills, the Attorney General should take it as a matter of great national urgency and emergency to propose these reforms to the Constitution, to the Electoral Act, to the National Assembly, and drive its direction objectively. But unfortunately, this is not happening. And it's not starting with this administration. Right. President Buhari, in fact, refused to assent to several of the bills that the National Assembly passed on constitutional amendment, and refused on 3 occasions to assent to electoral reform.
Well, I mean, so that is one big issue that I also think that we got to sort out, which is why, you know, many people still give late President Yar'Adua a lot of credit, you know, for the kind of reforms, electoral reforms that he put in place with the UAS Commission. Did a wonderful job, although, you know, they didn't quite accept some of the recommendations, including the one that would have removed I think he recommended that the chairmanship of INEC should not be from the president.
The Justice Mohammed Lawal Uwais Committee made several recommendations. This is the Electoral Reform Committee, which had very distinguished Nigerians in its membership. Yeah. In fact, one of its members became INEC chairman, Professor Tahiru Jega, and he did very well with conducting elections. Yeah. But of course, the elections after him have deteriorated very badly. But you know, we don't know how President Yar'Adua would have turned out. We don't know what would have happened to him in terms of what the outcome of his regime would have been. But he came following from the 2007 elections, and said, look, this election, I agree with you, lacks credibility, and I apologize for the failures of the Electoral Commission. But, you know, I have emerged, and I intend to reform things. And I think that when you situate that with the 2023 elections was also very badly conducted, comparable to the same comparison with 2007. It was really bad.
Oh, wow.
So when you had an election conducted like that and someone emerges, the acceptance, of course, those who lost went to court,
Right.
and the Supreme Court gave its final verdict. At that stage, as a lawyer, we have there is no further pursuit.
Yeah.
But what we expected President Tinubu to do was to say, look, I recognize all of the reports from election observers, and the Nigeria Civil Society Situation gave its own report, several other observers, Nigerian and international. The European Union Election Observation Mission, as always, did a very comprehensive recommendation for reforms.
Yeah.
This administration has not looked at any of this. If you fail to understand that two elections in 2023 was badly run, and you are setting out and continuing into 2027, then I worry about what that election would be. And I have been saying this repeatedly. I do not think that the foundation or the basis for the conduct of a good 2027 general election is in place.
Yeah, I also think, I do agree with you that, the president has to take the lead in electoral reforms. Clearly, I think we even have Professor Yakub, the INEC chairman, say something like whether it's, I think it's now advocating that the electronic voting, the BVAS situation should be, if I read the report rightly, it should now become law, because part of what happened in 2023 was that the court said that, look, BVAS is a regulation of INEC. It's not the law.
I think you make the point, Laudu, very clearly that the president should take a lead in this conversation, not because he would necessarily be the best advocate for it, but because he's the one in office. And he's the one who understands the challenges that the country's electoral system faces. The country ran a very bad election in 2023. I think that those who ran that bad election cannot become the best proponents of reform as we speak. So I'm not going to look at any suggestion from the corners you have mentioned. But I think that there is sufficient recommendations from those who observed the 2023 elections, whether it is the Civil Society Situation Room, other Nigerian organizations, international observers like the EU that I mentioned, the diplomatic missions in Nigeria who participated in all of that. They all made their recommendations. And I think that when you have a situation where you are preparing for a credible 2027 elections, we should have in place an election management body that is completely prepared to understand the failures of the past and move forward. And I think that in some ways, I know that there are constitutional terms for people in office, but we really need to have a new mindset to conduct the 2027 general.
I agree entirely with that. Final question. I wanted us to talk about the idea of criminal defamation. I know that you are a leading human rights lawyer yourself. What do you think about this idea of criminal defamation? And I'm looking at it beyond what is happening to Electoral TV. While what is happening to Electoral TV is condemnable, and we need to speak out against that what seems to be an abuse of power. But the very idea of having criminal defamation in our books, what do you think about it? And we've had all kinds of contestation. I mean, it's all kinds of views. Some lawyers said that, criminal defamation is off the books in Lagos and Edo. But now we are hearing that even in Ekiti, it's out of the book. My question to you is, first of all, what do you think about that, vis-a-vis our fundamental human rights? And why is it that it's still an issue 64 years after independence.
I would speak specifically first about Dele Farotimi. I agree with you, and it's not a judgment on the substance of the issues. It's true. About the process of our justice system.
Yeah, that we observe it.
I think it's shameful that you would have somebody charged for an offense that is not a felony, and the courts will refuse or delay in granting bail. I think it's unconscionable. It should never happen. And I'm not looking at the issues regarding whether he wrote a book or the contents of the book.
That's a different matter.
It's a completely different matter. Mine is about the process. I think it is shameful for the Nigerian judicial system, for the Nigerian justice system, that a Nigerian, or in fact a court, would fail to grant bail. And I've written a book on the bail process in Nigeria. And I know that one of the main reasons for refusing bail is if a person would not attend his trial or would interfere with investigation of a matter, amongst other issues. The case, and this is not looking at whether it is in fact legal or not to charge Dele with the issue of criminal defamation. The issue is, if you charge him with that offense, why would you not grant him bail? Even on his own recognition.
Yeah.
On his first attendance in court. Bail should not be punitive. So I think it is a big stain on the judiciary that Dele Farotimi, and he's been held in prison awaiting a grant of bail. It is shameful.
It is.
Secondly, bail in this country has been misused by the Nigerian courts to punish people. And I'm not talking of Dele now, I'm talking of several other cases. Why does a judge need to keep a person in prison for a simple offense, a misdemeanor, a non-felony case? Keep a person in prison to determine and rule on an application for bail. Especially when that person is given conditions for bail. Because the conditions for bail is for you to ensure that the person attends his trial. So you give, and the person fulfills it or not. So we need to change the system of justice administration that allows the courts to hold a person in prison. First of all, the person is arraigned, you refuse to hear to bail application. You say, go and file an application for bail.
In the court of summary jurisdiction.
Then the person files, you give a date for hearing it, the person comes for the hearing, and you now adjourn for a very long period to rule on a bail application. I think it is shameful that this is happening in our justice system, and it should not be allowed to happen. The issue of criminal defamation relates to whether a person, and that's what it should be, a criminal defamation relates to saying something that is capable of causing public unrest. Now tell me how that can happen. So if you say something about the federal government, for instance, or a state government, not about an individual, or you say something about the actions of a public official that is capable of creating unrest, that's what criminal defamation is. And that was used especially in the colonial times.
Yeah.
A lot of that law has changed today. A lot of us have suffered defamation on the hands of
social media.
Every day. So what we need to do is to reform the system and reform the ability to apprehend or assist persons who are injured by defamation in the social media to get justice. That's what should happen. So I feel sad about Dele Farotimi's case. I think it exposes the injustice of our judicial system.
Right.
And I think that every person who is responsible for keeping Dele Farotimi in prison for this period, awaiting his bail application, I'm not saying that what Dele wrote is right or wrong. That's not my issue. That's for him to deal with. But I think for every person who has been responsible in keeping a person in prison on an allegation of supposed criminal defamation is not doing our legal system any good. I think it's shameful that our legal system allows for the incarceration of a person for this long, awaiting bail application to be granted.
Anyway, thank you so much for coming. Do you have any last word to say on the state of the nation? President Tinubu has presented his second budget. Do you have any review about,
I think our budget should reflect the bigger concern about the citizen. I don't think that we do that enough. Most times when budgets are presented, when monies are spent, they do not reflect a concern for the citizen. The idea that you write up a budget and present it is not an achievement. What is the achievement is the deliverables on this. If you have promised to provide infrastructure, please do so. Certainly, the idea of luxury expenditure, the failure of government to cut back on the luxuries of its officials is impacting on delivery of development in the country. And I think that's what this administration should be more concerned about. Cut back on the luxuries, reduce your expenditure that is frivolous and focus on how to develop the broader infrastructure that will enable citizens to have a much more improved condition of living.
I agree entirely. And it's one of the things that we've said that it's important at this time of hardship for Nigerians to get a feel that they are not the only one tightening their belt, that the governments at federal and state levels are also tightening their belts, just to piggyback on what you said. Thank you so much, Mr. Nwankwo.
Thank you, Laulu,
for coming to Inside Sources, and thank you for the work that you do. I see that you do quite a bit, with National Assembly. We hope that you continue to support them and help us sort out some of our major constitutional issues. And thank you for your views and contributions generally to the national discourse.
Thank you so much, Laulu.
Thank you so much. And there you have it, another edition of Inside Sources. Like we say, Nigeria will always prevail. We believe Nigeria will prevail. Ultimately, we will win because we won't relent. We won't give up because we have no other country to go. My name is Laulu Akonde, and by the grace of God, I'll see you next edition. Thank you for watching.